thank you for joining us. My name is Mr. Anthony Wyckoff. I'm one of the directors and owners of Embrace Tutoring and Educational Services. I've been in education now for, hard to believe, a little over 10 years. And prior to starting Embrace Tutoring, I was actually a former Stanford admissions faculty liaison out in California. And while there, I learned a lot regarding the college admissions process. I also had the opportunity to work as a junior class and sophomore class dean at a private school, and where I was even a teacher. I was a teacher for mathematics, biology, chemistry, and a number of other subjects. Sort of, I wore many hats, so to speak. But I did have a chance to really see the educational side and the college admission side from both perspectives, whether you're applying from high school or really whether you're applying from college. And that's part of what we hope to shed a little bit of light on today to really alleviate some of your concerns. And the gentleman joining me is Mr. Chris Crail on behalf of Primerica Financial Services. And Chris, if you don't mind, can you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and thanks for this opportunity. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Chris Crail. I've been in the financial industry now almost 10 years. As crazy as that is, it definitely has flown by. I came from a background in kind of sports and coaching, and I've taken that same, kind of coaching approach to helping people with their finances and whether it be, college or, several other different things, just planning ahead, putting those things in place, but taking that coaching approach and, just showing people some of the tips and really letting them grow and get better, through some of the advice that I give them. And I just love being able to educate people, around these different areas. Surprising I didn't go into education after I learned how much I actually enjoyed it. But here I am. So, once again, thanks for this opportunity. Look forward to sharing a lot of great stuff tonight with you about the entire, college process.
Well, it's a pleasure having you. I know that we've done seminars like this in the past, and it's always different every time, right? Depending on the
Mhm.
audience. So once again, guys, we welcome your questions. You're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and Chris and I will do our best to answer them ongoing. And then if you would like to get in contact with us, we do have our contact information built into the brief presentation. All right, now, sort of moving into it a little bit, many of you will generally have questions. Well, here's kind of two pictures of us, right, in terms of who we are. Many of you are going to generally have questions that may need additional feedback. And one of the things we encourage you to do is explore some of the outside resources that we have. Our YouTube channel is a really great place to start, as well as our Instagram, our Facebook channel, and as well as we do have blog posts and such that go on directly on embracetutoring.com. So there are a number of things. We will even be sending this video out as a resource so that way you guys can use it ongoing. What we've come to understand is that there isn't necessarily a cookie cutter approach, right, in terms of college admissions, or really even just in terms of budgeting. So if you have follow-up questions, and if you do have things that are more personalized to your students or your family's needs, just simply feel free to follow up. We're always here as a resource. Now, in terms of generally who we are at Embrace Tutoring and what we aim to do, our company specializes in creating what we refer to as academic roadmaps for our students, elementary through college, as they are looking to apply to their next chapter in furthering education. We work with hundreds of tutors, hundreds of students, hundreds of families, all throughout various academic levels, whether if they're applying to high school, maybe perhaps they're applying to college, that seems to be the most popular, or even if they are applying to, let's say, graduate school, med school, law school, et cetera, we assist them during that process of essentially what to expect, how will admissions teams evaluate their academics, their portfolio, et cetera. And then we work with experienced professionals like Chris, mainly as an advocate or educational component of just how to keep our audience better informed, right? What to expect. And family budgeting is a big part of any sort of process of whether or not you send your children to private high school, whether or not they decide to go to cyber school, whether or not they decide to go to college, where, how far. That's why we wanted to bring him in, because we often, our job is to prepare them as much as possible for success academically, to put them in that position of the application process. But there are considerations outside of education, such as the family dynamic, finances, et cetera. And that's why we wanted to have Chris come on and speak to some things regarding that extent. Now, with respect to what we hope to cover for today. And as much as possible, what some of the things we hope to cover that I personally will be covering are just the general overview of the college admissions process, how your transcripts, your GPA, and course selection are really going to be evaluated, your test scores, and by test scores we're referring to SAT and ACT, specifically your and extracurricular activities and how they will be viewed upon, and in terms of really what your intended major is, and how your extracurriculars, or what we refer to as ECs, and how the college admissions team will really perceive them. Your letters of recommendation, perhaps when to ask or whom to ask, the purpose of your college essays and the importance of your college essays, as well as the general application program known as the Common App. Now, we're not going to be going into the nitty-gritty of the Common App today, or nor will we be going into the FAFSA. We actually will be doing separate webinars on those. This webinar is intentional to give you kind of a general overview of really what to expect when applying for the college application process, and at the same time how it all fits together. Now, Mr. Chris Crail is going to be talking a lot about sort of just the general cost of college, some notable schools that you may want to pay attention to, or just general relative figures of the importance of financial aid and how to plan for financial aid, as well as loan options and budgeting as a family, and simply having that talk, right, of where do you want to go to school and how do we budget these things and what are the considerations. Perhaps you have twins, right, and then there's even more to consider. Maybe you even have another one older in college or another one coming up in college, right? There's a lot of different dynamics, or a lot of different factors to consider. Now, I get this question all the time, mainly because of the fact that when I was working as a faculty liaison out in California, and into a general idea, really. Let me go back real fast of what it's like to be inside the admissions room. Inside the admissions room, what we tend to look at are your transcripts, your test scores. We do look at your and your extracurricular activities, your letters of recommendation, your purpose of your essays. But if I really had to kind of break it down for you, you first are evaluated based upon your regional director. And your regional director is an individual who is in charge of your region, right? In charge of the schools, forming the relationships with those guidance counselors or with those college counselors in that particular area. Your regional director, once you apply, typically through Common App or supplemental applications, those individuals will break it down to what is called a quant score. So your quant score is based upon your course selection. Most importantly, it's always about the level of the classes that you're taking, then the grades in those classes, which are what high school refers to as your GPA. College refers to it as a general QPA, or quantitative point average, because it's based upon the courses that you take, right? So you theoretically want to try to take the highest level courses that you can and do the best that you can. The question that we always get all the time is, should my son or daughter take honors bio or AP bio, right? And like hypothetically. And the answer to that is, it depends on what you're applying, or it depends on where you're applying, depends on what you're applying for, and it depends on what the grades are. I mean, in those relative areas. I mean, essentially though, your quant score is made up of your SAT score, your ACT score, they're no longer accepting subject tests, or no longer relevant, but that was part of the quant score, as well as other academic considerations, such as your courses and maybe independent studies and things of that nature. The one area that not a lot of people honestly pay enough attention to be fair, and these are things that I would consider, and I would encourage you to sort of investigate further, would be the letters of recommendation as well as the purpose of the essays. And the reason for this is because these are both built into what is called your personality score. So your and your extracurricular activities are also assessed. However, if you're not necessarily a specialist, meaning that you're being recruited for that area, whether it's sports or perhaps musicianship, then really you're kind of put in the pile with all of the other kind of standard applicants. And there are different types of piles, and we'll get into that. We'll kind of get into some of the questions or nitty gritty. But what I want you to take away is that when you apply, a regional director from within the admissions room is going to stand up and present on your behalf. And what happens is that person has been sort of doing like highlights on your college application. And what they're taking out of your college application is personality traits. They're also going to understand maybe what courses that you've taken, for what your given GPA, and we refer to that as intellectual vitality as well as academic rigor. That's what college admissions will refer to it as. And then, right, once we get through those things, then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of your letters of recommendation as well as your college essays. And those things help to encapsulate what we refer to as your personality score. Both are important, or everything is important. It all plays a role. And obviously, the more competitive the college, the more important that those things are. I would honestly say, and to be fair to you, the letters of recommendation as well as the college essays are generally the hidden factor, right? Because what happens is, in order for you to get to the table, in order for us to discuss your application inside the admissions room, your regional director is presenting on your behalf. And what happens is that we will then pull up elements of your college application. And the elements we generally tend to pull up are your essays as well as your letters of recommendation, because, and this is the truth, we want to understand how you'll be an asset to that community. And so we discuss who you are as a person, what attributes, what other people see in you as, evident in your letters of recommendation. So those are, in a nutshell, that's essentially what happens. We discuss your application. Other individuals have already also looked at your application. They also have highlight reels, which they will then discuss, or bullet points, if you will. And then we vote. And then from that vote, we will generate a sort of a definite list, waiting list, etc. And then sort of, recipients and such are notified accordingly. There are other considerations, which is scholarships, as well as a few other things. Now, with respect to the test scores for the SAT and the ACT, Chris is definitely going to get into a lot more of the financial aid, but I will clarify one particular thing, is that what is called merit scholarships, when we're referring to inside the college admissions room, merit scholarships are based upon your incoming GPA. So merit scholarships, or merit aid, and the scholarships you receive are really based upon your GPA, the courses you've taken, and your SAT or ACT scores. And there is a lot of money, or I would say awards or recognitions or scholarships, et cetera, that are granted to particular students who do well in those things. And even if the school is technically test optional, the odds of you receiving merit scholarships and submitting high SAT or ACT scores are even significantly greater. So, right. Now, on that note, there are a few things that I just want to quickly clarify. Colleges will look at your high school transcripts, your GPA and your course selection, your test scores, your ECs, your extracurricular activities, your letters of recommendation, your essays. Some colleges will also ask you to submit what is called an art supplement. SCAD is very popular for Savannah and Art Institute and Design. They may request an interview for you to go and speak with someone. They might also track what is referred to as demonstrated interest. Now, there's different types, but demonstrated interest is basically the fanhood that is associated with that school, whether or not you are an alumnus of the school, whether or not maybe you have tickets, right, to the Penn State alma mater, right? What is the level of fanhood that is going to the school? Demonstrated interest can also be, what is your demonstrated interest within a field? So say, for instance, I want to major in engineering, I should probably take engineering related classes while I'm in high school, and colleges will look and evaluate both. And then of course there might be an application fee. Many of the schools around the country do require an application fee, or even multiple application fees. So this would be considered a completed application for a prospective candidate. Now, there are things that you can control, which would be these lists. Now, unfortunately, there are things that you can't control. And the things that you really can't control within a college are each of the years of the admission cycles, right? The gender balance, the ethnic and racial background, legacy, and the giving potential of that university. I will readily admit that legacies, just in general, do have preferential treatment, and in my experience, that's because they're in a separate pile. They're in a pile of their own for most universities, where we are. We have to look at those candidates and give them, rather than, so they sort of skip the initial phase, if you will, of having to go through the filtering process. Legacy is kind of, you immediately in some ways kind of get pushed to the top. Now, not all schools will give preferential treatment to legacies. And many of them in the recent years have actually dialed this back a bit. But legacies and giving potential are still a strong consideration when you're applying to particular schools. And then previous submission cycles, right? What's the vision of the school? Did we previously enroll a number of students who are now all doing engineering or music or particular art, right? So understanding the admission cycles of that school and working with a college counselor can actually be to your benefit in that area. And then of course, institutional initiatives are really just what the vision is and what that school is beginning to concentrate on. And from a budgeting perspective, that also helps you understand really maybe, are they doing certain internships in certain places? Are they putting up a new building, right, on behalf of your major, right? It kind of helps you to know those things. I will tell you, Villanova over the last probably 5 to 10 years has completely, they're adding a new building every year, right? And many of our students are probably every single time, if you guys ever drive down in the Philadelphia or the Bryn Mawr area, many of our students who are applying to Villanova, they're generally going now for particular majors that are focused because now they have more things to offer. Back to the main point, unfortunately, these are things you cannot control. So it's just best for you to stay informed. It's best for you to speak with college admissions staff when you're visiting. It's also best for you to speak with your guidance counselor. Perhaps they are aware of other trends of what's happening within college and sort of the admissions landscape. Now, I wanted to put together a quick frequently asked questions that we generally get for the college admission staff on behalf of Embrace Tutoring, but I will say that we'll save these for the end, but at any point in time, if you do, or if you would like to kind of circle back to these questions, just feel free to write it in the chat, and then Chris and I will make note, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty and do our best to answer as many of these questions. The one major question we generally always get first is, when do I begin? Another major question is, should my child take the SAT or the ACT? Do they matter, right? Is it important for them to take it? What is the difference between merit, scholarships, and financial aid, which I'm sure Chris can touch on a little bit later on in this presentation? How do I find a college or university that is the best fit for me? Where do I start, and what steps do I take? Who should I ask to write my letters of recommendation? This is very important. I'd be happy to kind of weigh. I myself have written hundreds of letters of recommendation over the years because I was a junior teacher in addition to working in college. Also, will applying early decision or early action actually improve my chances? Is there any benefit to this depending on where I'm applying? And or finally, what should I do when I visit college campuses? Now, if any of these questions kind of strike you, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll do our best to kind of consolidate, and we'll save some time towards the end of answering these. Also, stay tuned. We will be doing future webinars specifically on each of these individual topics. Okay. Right. Now, here's a quick checklist because the top question is, when do I begin? And I wanted to give you a quick rundown before I turn it over to Mr. Chris Crail, that most of our students who have done well over the years, they generally follow a standard recipe, if you will. So junior year, they're generally focusing on their AP, and strength of their course load, their honors, their AB or their AP, their IB classes. They do attempt to finalize their test prep, ACT, SAT, subject tests. I will give you a huge, hint that many of our students tend to actually finish up their SAT prior to March of their junior year. I would say March or April of their junior year. And the reason being is because APs are in May, and IBs and everything in final exams, and the culmination of the classes generally become tougher as the year goes on. So they want to sort of wrap this up. Many of our students will typically start end of sophomore year. They'll work through summer of sophomore year. If we're talking about SAT or ACT, they then will take the test a couple times. They'll super score their results. They're happy, right? Parents understand where they're going to apply. They do a few college visits. They speak with someone like Chris the Budget, right? That they have a much better plan, a much better understanding. And then that way, for the summer of their senior year, they have a chance to focus on their essays. And that is generally sort of the roadmap of what they do. They stay involved in school, they continue college visits, and they get it working and working the college lists of where they would like to go and for what reasons. They consider and speak with teachers for letters of recommendation, which is immensely important come their junior year as they're establishing those relationships. They meet with their guidance counselor. If indeed that school offers a meet and greet or some sort of session, I know many schools do different practices. During the summer, they're going to evaluate their family balance sheet. They're going to visit colleges. They're going to potentially do some form of educational work, whether it's a summer research opportunity, internship, etc. If necessary, they will continue doing their SAT or their ACT in order to enhance their scores just a little bit more, because perhaps it's for a scholarship or perhaps to increase their admissions chances. I'm going to go back to it though, that the summer of their junior year is generally when they're starting to work out that list and have conversations with individuals like Chris regarding the family budget, right? Because it happens all very, very quickly, right? During the senior year, they want to finish strong. They want to maintain that strong GPA. They want to get ready to finalize their college applications and their essays. Typically in September and October, many of the students will try to apply early. Once they are accepted, which can be as early as, let's say, December, right? And if they finalize their letters of recommendation and they send everything along, then they might apply for FAFSA, which is the Federal Financial Aid, Students Assistance and Scholarships. They'll be notified what they will receive in terms of merit-based aid, and they will also be notified what they will receive in terms of financial aid. And that's where conversations like Chris come in so handy. They then will have the opportunity to choose which school is going to be in their best interest. You will know once your son or daughter is accepted to a particular school, they will send you a package, and you will know what the cost is, the relative cost is of them going to that school. That's why I'm saying it's good to have a plan, right? You want to have as much of it as possible, so that way if your son and daughter do get into that particular school, option A versus option B versus option C, you have a relative idea of how can we make this happen, or is this really not in the right ballpark, depending on the conditions at hand, right? You obviously are going to evaluate your college acceptances list and your best fit, and then you are going to graduate, right? And they are off, right? And as they move forward. Now, that is in a nutshell. Obviously, this varies a little bit from family to family, but please feel free once again to post anything in the chat if you do have individual questions. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Chris Crail. If you do have questions regarding the college admissions process or other frequently asked questions that I covered, we'll definitely save some time towards the end.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Anthony. And that's some great information. Definitely stuff I wish I knew when I was in high school coming through this process, because it was definitely challenging for me not knowing any of these things. So anyway, but thanks again for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in so I can get through this information. So first off, is college worth it? And I think we all know that college is worth it, right? But let's just look at some statistics here and kind of see, as far as earnings, depending on what, if we get a degree, if we don't get a degree. So on the left side here, we can see median weekly earnings and unemployment rate by educational attainment. So the left side here is earnings, weekly earnings. So if we see high school diploma, no college, weekly earnings are about 700 hours a week. And then we can see it goes up, some college, a little bit more, associates, a little bit more. If we're in bachelor's degree, we got about, 1,200 a week, master's almost 1,500, professional degree getting close to 2,000. Interestingly enough, professional degree actually makes a little bit more than a doctoral degree, which I always found interesting, right? And then same thing on the unemployment rate, it kind of works exactly the same, but the opposite, right? The unemployment rate's higher, on the lower education level that we've attained, right? So we just have a high school diploma, and these were back in 2017. Obviously, these numbers change all the time, but they take a couple years for them to get the final numbers here. So that's why it's a couple years old, right? But, unemployment rate at that time for high school diploma was, around 5%. And you can see it scales all the way down to, if we have professional or doctorate degree, it's less than 2%, right? So we can clearly see that it is worth it. We make more money if we do go get a degree. And we also have a lower unemployment rate, right? However, there is a big problem in today's world, and it's been a problem for many years now, and that's that underemployment, right? Where we might get out of college, we have a job, but maybe we're part-time, or maybe, the hours aren't quite there where we want it to be, right? So these are just showing a bunch of different majors, and the pink is we're underemployed in the first job, but we escaped underemployment. The red one is we're underemployed in the first job, but we're still underemployed after 5 years. And then the gray box is not underemployed in the first job. And so we can, I'm not going to go hit everyone. I'll just kind of hit a couple. Education, right? That's a very common one. 50% were not underemployed in their first job. 14% were underemployed in their first job and, were able to get out of it. 36%, however, were still underemployed after 5 years. And I know myself, having some family members in the education field, sometimes it takes, several years maybe to get that full-time position that we're looking for. So that's what we're talking about there. Obviously, as we go down the line, we see these numbers differ. For engineering, 71%, right out of college are getting that, full-time job right away, not underemployed. But after 5 years, 18% are still potentially underemployed. Now, obviously, there are probably several factors. It could be that individual person that maybe, wasn't taking the right steps, but you can see the differences amongst the different majors. And so, having a plan to get out of that underemployment, if we do end up in that spot when we first get out of college, and typically that is, based on the individual, putting forth a little bit more effort, networking, meeting the right people. It's not just what major are you in, but there is obviously a lot of individuality there. And then, hit on some of the top schools, right? And so, we all know, all these schools, right? Harvard, Stanford, Yale, MIT, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, Brown, California Institute of Technology, Duke, Dartmouth. So these are all excellent schools, obviously. So those are the top 10 by Forbes in 2019. These numbers they tend to change a little bit, but most of these generally stay in the top 10, 12, 15. They might move around a little bit. And I'm just going to hit some other ones that were on the top Forbes list, ones that are in the general Northeast. And so, you got Columbia there at 14, Swarthmore right outside of Philadelphia, number 25, United States Military Academy, NYU, Carnegie Mellon, U.S. Air Force Academy, Haverford, also here in the Philadelphia area, Coast Guard, Vassar, another great school. These are all excellent schools, as you mentioned before, Anthony, Villanova, Bucknell, Penn State, Rutgers. So all these are excellent schools. Some are public, some are private. I hit on the military schools, the Air Force, military, Coast Guard, because those are very challenging schools to get into. However, your education is free, right? It's paid for when you get into those schools. And so that was the main reason why I wanted to put those ones on there, because college can be very expensive. And most of these schools on these lists are very, very expensive schools. And so those are ones where you can get an excellent education, potentially for free if you can get into those schools. So those are really good options for, if your kids are interested possibly in getting into the military and getting their college paid for, for free. So picking the right school is very important, right? I just, obviously went through a handful of them, but there's thousands and thousands of schools out there. You can get great resources at www.ed.gov. You can compare prices, graduation rates, average tuition after graduation. You also may want to consider a school with a good reputation for your major. For example, right in the Philadelphia area, you have Drexel University that's very well known for engineering. And so there's not other great schools for engineering. But, if that's something that you want to consider, if your child wants to consider engineering, that might be a great school to look at. And several schools have certain specialties that they might be, really good at, that they have a really strong, professor base. They have a really strong connections within those majors, and they can help your child get a degree, get a job coming out, after their degree. Another great option is considering community college for 2 years, especially if, finances are a concern, if we haven't put money away ahead of time, and college is going to cost a lot of money. I personally did that. I went that route. I went community college for 2 years. I will admit, at the time coming out of high school, I hated it. I was very, not happy about that. But after the fact, when I got out of school with half of the debt that most of my peers had, I was not mad about it, because I ended up going to Temple University after community college, and my degree said Temple. And, outside of me telling somebody, nobody really would know that I went to community college first. And for me, it worked out great. And so, if there's not a specific reason why your child has to go directly to that college, it's a great way to save some money. Also, it gives them a little bit of preparation. It's kind of, generally community college is a little bit easier, so it kind of allows the student to ease their way into that college. So particularly if they're maybe not as strong of a student, community college is really a great way for them to get into it. And then also considering a trade school. I don't know if you've heard, but trades are in desperate need of people right now. Many trades are really, their average age, for example, of a welder, the average age is like 58, right? So the welders are in something that's of desperate need. And all of these really, electricians, plumbers, all these are great things where, you can potentially go to a trade school or possibly just go right into an apprenticeship right? Go right in with a job where you're making money right away. And there might not even be a cost to that potentially, depending on the situation. And you can make, really, really good money in those positions, sometimes even more than certain degrees, certain majors might pay. So, not everyone necessarily has to go to the traditional university, right? College is not necessarily meant for everybody. And there are many different routes that students can choose to go if you feel like, the traditional route might not be the right fit. And so what do majors pay? 2019, the average starting salary for some different majors, and it's interesting enough, the salaries are very similar to what I showed you before with the unemployment rates and the chance of having a job coming right out. Right, but engineering, generally speaking, is the highest paid major coming out with a bachelor's degree, about $69,000 to start. And then work your way down. Business 57, arts 48. Early childhood education 39,000. Right, and so knowing what that salary is going to be coming out of school, is very important to plan on that, right? Because if we're going to pick a very expensive school, that's going to cost us, let's say, $40,000-$50,000 a year. It may not make sense to study early childhood education and pay, $50,000 a year if that's what we're going to come out making, right? It may, depending on the situation, right? But considering those things in advance, considering the cost of the college versus how much income can we feasibly make coming out of school, is a big factor, because, as we all know, student loan debt has become a big problem in today's world. Many people, of all age brackets, have a lot of student loan debt. And so, kind of planning ahead and thinking about the ability to pay that money back, or, if we ourselves as parents are going to pay for that, do we want to, pay for how much do we want to pay for them to come out and have a degree, right? And we can see down the bottom here, high school grad only making about 25 grand. So that comes back to the fact that, in most cases, it is definitely worth it, to go to the college and get that degree. However, we do want to, plan in advance, what we, aim to be doing, right? So how do most people pay for college, right? So, we have parent income and savings at 32%. So that's the largest portion. Right, so that's a big one here. Relatives and friends, that's 5%. I didn't have any relatives or friends that wanted to pay for my college, so hopefully you guys have some people there in your life that want to help your kids pay for college, right? Scholarships and grants is 30%, right? So there's a lot of options out there for scholarships. We'll hit on that a little bit, and as well as grants. Parent borrowing is 6%. There's a lot of parent plus loans, different things like that, where you can take out a loan in your name. And then student borrowing is 16%. That would be your traditional, loans, whether they be federal or privatized loans. And then student income and savings at 11%. And so, those are, the different areas of how people generally pay for college. Obviously, it's different, depending on the family. Every family is different. However, those are just the general averages, right? So going through those a little bit more, ways to pay for college, right? Scholarships. There's so many different options out there for scholarships. I'll show you a couple websites that you can check out and look into them. There's literally thousands of different options out there. You do want to be aware of scams, just like anything else in today's world. There are unfortunately scams out there, where, they're trying to say, hey, pay this application fee for the scholarship. And really there's no scholarship there, and different things like that. So you do want to be careful with that. Make sure you're double checking on those scholarships. But if you check out some of the resources, that we'll provide to you, there's some great things there. Loans, obviously, whether they be federal or private. Our savings, whether we do that personal savings that we save up, in the bank account or something like that, or investment. We can also, have the, 529 plans or other types of, education savings plans. The federal, state, and financial aid, through the FAFSA. As we hit on, we'll hit a little bit more. Military aid, if we ourselves are veterans or are in the military, or if our child was going to go into the military, that can potentially be paid for. And then other types of grants out there, with the, federal grants and things like that. And then work study, where our child can work, part-time through the university and make a little bit of extra money there, as part of that. So those are all the different ways that we can pay for college. So we want to start with our savings. This is a college funding pyramid. We want to start with savings and work our way up. So as much money as we can put away, the better, right? The only challenge with how much we put away, is just planning on that, because how much we have saved will affect how much financial aid we get from the government, right? So there is, certain things to consider. It really does depend on each individual family as to, maybe how much we should save or where we should save that money. There are different ways, and I'll hit on that in a minute. But that's where we want to start with. And then we want to go to scholarships, grants, work study. Once again, there's a lot of scholarships out there. Some of them are available to everybody. Some of them are specific to the university or specific to the major, different things like that. But there's a lot of different scholarships out there. The grants and the work study also, that would all be through the FAFSA program. And then loans, and that would be if we had to, the government may offer us some loans, but then also outside of that, you may have to go outside and do a private loan, say through like the Sallie Mae or through a bank or something like that. But typically we want that to be the last resort. We typically want to, try to, if we can, stay away from those private loans because they're very expensive. They really don't give us a good interest rate, and they don't work with us as well. I know I myself dealt with some private loans, and the companies aren't very forgiving, in my opinion. So we want to avoid that if we can, but if we do have to use them, we want to make that the last option. Oops, sorry about that. And then here's the cost, the 4-year public college cost versus the median income. So this is a picture, obviously, of the United States here. And on the right side, we can see this is the net price as the percentage of income, right? And so, so we're paid the average cost of a public college versus our net income. And so, for those of us that are in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware are amongst the highest in the country as far as the cost of college versus our median income. So it's very expensive in this part of the country to go to school. In New York, it's a lot cheaper. There are a lot of public schools. A lot of the SUNY schools in New York are very affordable compared to, in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. As we can see out in California, it's very cheap. Versus the average income, partially because the average income in California is very high. Obviously, the cost of living out there is very high, but the cost for the colleges out there is relatively cheap compared to the income. So these all play a role because of the huge cost in, say, if you're in Pennsylvania, if you're in New Jersey. Because of that cost, in some cases, it actually could make sense to go out of state. A lot of times, we think, oh, we have to stay in state because it's cheaper to be in state. Well, and in many cases, it is cheaper to be in state. But when you look at those costs versus if we said went to Florida or Oklahoma or something like that, it's possible that the net cost could be lower. And so that's just something to consider there. State schools aren't always going to be the cheapest at the end of the day, with the net income. So, that always plays a role. And obviously, once again, it's different per family. Everybody has a different income. That's the median income. You might be on the high end of that, or you might be on the low end of that. So, but just something to consider there, when we're looking at, schools and potential options. I don't know why that keeps happening. Sorry about that. And then what does college cost into the future, right? Things get, just like anything else, right? Inflation, goes on, right? Things get more expensive, right? We've been talking about that a lot. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that between gas prices and everything else over the last several months, right? And so, same thing with college. The inflation of college has actually been much higher than the inflation of all other goods and services, throughout the United States, right? So over here on the left, we show the, college cost for private, public, out of state, and then public in-state, back starting in 1997, 98, all the way out to 2017, 2018. I know it's a little faded there, so hopefully you can see that okay. But back in 1997, 98, the average cost of private college per year was about $17,000. And public in-state was only about $4,000, right? Crazy as that is, because that cost has obviously come up tremendously, right? But then, here move forward to just a few years ago, 2017, 2018, private college is now up to over $40,000, or about $42,000 or so there. And the cost of public in-state, this is just for tuition now, is about $11,000 or $12,000, right? So the cost has come up tremendously over the last 20 years. But then look at into the future, right? This is estimated, right? I hope that these numbers are wrong. But for those of you that might have younger children and things like that, these are the costs that they're estimating moving forward, right? So 2015, 2016, this was when this, was produced. Actually, this was produced about 2018 was when this slide was produced. $19,000 for public college, and then $43,000 for private college, right? But the estimated cost, and this was done for, say, someone who was born in this year, the estimated cost 18 years from then, so we're about, 12 years away from that now, would be $55,000 for public college, four-year public college, and 125,000 for private, right? So it's becoming more and more expensive. Like I said, I hope these numbers are wrong, but they're just using what's happened over the last 20 years to estimate what would happen over the next 20 years, right? So the point is that college is expensive, right? And as we can see on the bottom here, inflation for college has been 5 times higher than inflation for food and energy costs over the last 30 years. And some of you may remember that from when you were in college, right? Or maybe you hear stories even from when your parents were in college, right? A lot of, people say, oh, well, I paid for college, no problem. I just work part-time and that sort of thing. But, as college becomes more expensive, it's not as easy to do that, right? College doesn't cost $1,000 or $2,000 anymore. And so it becomes a lot more, difficult to be able to do that. So point being, we want to plan ahead. The earlier that we can plan ahead, the better, because of this tremendous cost that does come up here, right? And so I'll go in a little bit into the financial aid. As Anthony mentioned, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here. They're going to do a separate webinar on this, and they're going to have a financial aid expert come in and talk about that. So please, check that out. But what we're just hit on, completing the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA. I can never say that properly, FAFSA. But most college students and families are expected to contribute, right? And so how much depends on the expected family contribution, or the EFC. So everybody, when you apply for FAFSA, you're going to get an EFC, right? And so what they're looking at is your assets, they're looking at your income and other information to determine the EFC, right? So the fastest and easiest way to apply online is FAFSA on the web, is fafsa.ed.gov. And all students should create a FSA ID on the website, right? And so there's a way you go on there, you can create your own personalized ID, and you would then continue to use that ID each year as you, reapply. So there's the most important factors when they calculate the EFC, right? And so assets and income, right? So they're looking at the student. They're going to count 20% of the student's assets, or however much they have, say, in the savings account, or if they have an investment account, anything that's being reported to them, they're going to count 20% of that, right? But for our parents, right, for you all, it's going to be about 5.6%, right? So they're counting your child's assets more than your assets, because they obviously understand your assets are not just paying for college, they're paying for other things. But when it comes to the student, they're kind of expecting that, hey, all the money they have should be going towards college. It's kind of what they're saying to some extent, right? And so point being, we don't want to have a whole lot of money in our student's name. And I'll hit on that a little bit more, because 529s work a little bit differently in other type of college plans. But then as far as income goes, for students, they're going to count 50% of the student's income, while only counting 22 to 47% of the parent's income, and that's based on several different factors. And so same thing, if our students are earning income, or if maybe we're a person going back to school later and we're trying to apply for FAFSA, these are all factors to consider, as far as calculating the EFC. And then additional considerations: how many children are in the family, and how many children are in college, and not just children in college, but actually how many family members are in college. Because I actually benefited from that. My father had gone back to college around the same time that I was first going to college. And so I was actually able to get more financial aid my first 2 years in college, because my dad was also in college at the time. So that benefited both me and him. I was wondering why it got so much more expensive after he graduated. So it does play a role there. And so, these are just things to think about in advance. If your child is already, looking towards becoming a senior next year and all that, you might not be able to change a lot of this stuff at the moment, right? But if you can, look at this stuff, you can also always change it for future years as well. And then these are the deadlines for financial aid. You can typically fill out as early as October 1st for the following school year. So that would be this coming October for the 21-22 year. Now, actually, I think that might be an old slide. So, but anyway, yeah, October 1st for the following school year, right? That's when when it starts, right? And then the deadline must be submitted by midnight Central Time, June 30th, 2021, for the current school year, and then June of 2022 for the following school year, right? So each year you have a 9-month window to go ahead and apply for that FAFSA, right? And then each state also has its own deadline as well. And so for Pennsylvania, all first-time applicants enrolled in community college, business trade school, school of nursing, or designated PA admission institution, or a non-transferable 2-year program is August 1st of 2020. and there might be an additional form. And then all other applicants outside of those would be May 1st of 2020. So obviously I forgot to update these numbers, Anthony. Sorry about that. But same thing for 2021. It's the same dates, just pushed forward to 2021. And then each college may also have their own deadline as well, because when they are putting together, if you get accepted and they're putting together your package, as Anthony mentioned, right, you'll get a package saying, this is how much we're going to, we're going to give you, this is how much aid you're getting, and here's what your expected contribution would be to the cost of college. So each college has their own deadline. So we do want to find out about what those are, if we're looking at a particular school, and also about when they're processing the FAFSA, because you can always go back if you made a mistake on the FAFSA, you can always go back and change that. I know I actually was recently talking to somebody about that who had reported some things incorrectly on their FAFSA form, and when they got their award letter, the numbers didn't seem to look right, and so they had to go back in and change it. So just something you want to consider. You want to make sure all that stuff's correct and make sure you don't miss any of those deadlines. And then loan options, right? First is the federal student loans. Those are all going to be generally awarded through the award letter, through the FAFSA process. You can look at some of those through studentaid.ed.gov types of loans. You have the Perkins loan, you have the direct subsidized loan, direct unsubsidized loan, and then a direct plus loan, and that's student cost of attendance minus any other financial aid. And then you have the private student loans, right? So as I mentioned, you want to go through the federal ones first. Those that have a better interest rate. They also are more forgiving. Many of you probably know, some of you may even have the loans where the past year, you haven't had to pay on the federal student loans if you didn't want to, right? And there's been no interest charge as well, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the private student loans. Now, some private student loans may have offered that to their, to their clients, to their payees, but that's not a requirement, right? So, there are a lot more, kind of benefits, so to speak, that come along with the federal student loans. But if you don't have sufficient funds through those, then you might have to go through the private. The most typical ones are like Sallie Mae or Navient. Those are the two biggest ones. I think Great Lakes is another one. There's several other ones out there. You can go to Discover, Citizens Bank, many other banks do it. And you want to consult with this school's financial aid office, or possibly go to your own personal bank to see what options are out there. But there are several different ways you can go if you need to, right? So what about if your kids are young, right? What if you have young children and, hey, we're, several years from school, can we get an estimate of the financial aid, that we'll get? So if you're not ready to quite apply, but you're seeking kind of an estimate so you can plan ahead and all that, there is a free financial aid calculator. It's called FAFSA Forecaster. It provides an early estimate of eligibility. Obviously, if your situation changes drastically, the same thing's going to happen here, but you can get an idea of what that would look like. So you can check that out. The calculator is offered at the website of Federal Student Aid, which is an office of the U.S. Department of Education. And basically, it's very similar to doing the actual FAFSA. It's just not real. Like, it's not going to actually apply or anything like that. So you get that kind of estimate there. And then other types of assistance, scholarships, right? That's a huge one. Scholarships.com. And database of 2.7 million different scholarship opportunities. Some of them are very small, a couple $100 here, a couple hundreds there. Some of them are huge, several $1,000s. But there's so many different scholarship opportunities out there, and it's always worth looking into them. It's always worth applying. Some of them are very hyper specific. They may be, if you are in a very specific area, or maybe if you are an immigrant, there's certain ones. There's all kinds of different ones out there, to apply for. But you want to check those out. You can also check out Career Info Net, scholarship search. There's over 5,000 ones there. And then grants, same thing. Look at all the different grant options, and then work study as well. You can check all that stuff out. Those are all great options, for you there. Be glad to chat more about that. And then something else to consider, I don't know if any of you heard of this, right? But many schools are actually willing to barter or negotiate the tuition, right? And this has actually started to become a little bit more well-known over the last year or two. But it isn't anything new necessarily. The school is not obligated to do so, but many schools are willing to give discounts on their tuition, particularly those that may have strained financial resources or other financial burdens. It is a case-by-case scenario. It also does sometimes depend on the student and how well, that the grades are, and the extracurriculars and all that stuff. Like, if they really want your student to come to that school, they're more willing to give that discount on tuition and things like that. If you just barely snuck in through the wait list, probably not, right? But it is a case-by-case scenario, definitely worth exploring. So if you get that award letter and it's just not anywhere near what you feel like you can pay, it's definitely worth approaching them and seeing if there might be a way to negotiate on that. But definitely want to start that process as soon as you get accepted, and maybe even before you get that award letter, you might want to even ask about that and see if there might be an option there. So that's something that I definitely never knew about until more recently. But why save for college? Why do we want to do that, right? Well, here's a big reason why. Student loan debt, as we all know, has blown out of proportion over the last several years. It's exceeded 1.5 trillion, surpassing credit cards and auto loans. Borrowers are going to pay thousands of extra dollars in interest versus those that paid for college out of pocket. 88% of parents plan to help with college costs, and 37% of students change their college plans because of money. 28% consider not going to college at all because of lack of money. And then 44% of parents plan to borrow to help kids with college costs. And so because of that, those are some reasons why, if we can, we want to plan ahead, and save for college, right? Because we don't want our children to be stuck with the student debt, or even us ourselves not be stuck with that debt for our kids, if possible, right? So the better we can plan ahead, right? So I'm not going to hit all this fine print here, but the three basic types of savings plans for college are 529 plan is the most common, right? And then you have Coverdell Education Savings Accounts, and then you have UGMA and UTMA, which technically are not college savings plans, but many people do use them for college savings, right? But typically, I'm going to hit mostly on the 529. I'm going to hit on that in a second, but that one gives us the most ability to put away, as well as there's just more benefits to that versus the other ones, right? So what are the advantages? Three primary advantages: tax benefits, right? The money grows tax-free as long as we use it for college or college, books, room and board, all that stuff. Professional money management, and then control by the account owner. Okay, so to remember them easily, think the preferred choice. Okay, and then how do we set a savings goal? We want to put a 5-step savings plan in place. We want to determine the cost of college, identify our savings profile, set our savings goal, it may be less than the total cost, choose a savings vehicle, and then establish a savings schedule, right? And then the power of starting early. So if we started with $2,500, we started putting in $50 a month, or 100 or 200, show the different things. So if we started 6 years prior to college, if we do 50 a month, we got 7,900. If we do 200 a month, 21,000, right? If we started though when our child's born, that same contribution amount, obviously for a longer period of time, 26,000 if we did $50 a month, and that's 85,000 if we did $200 a month, right? So waiting costs way too much money, right? And I know many of you, may have kids that are getting ready to go to college. Maybe you didn't start, but that's okay, right? But the point is that, if you have younger kids or, just for, just in general, this doesn't just apply to college, it applies to anything. The sooner we start saving and investing money, the better it is, right? And we let that compound interest work for us, right? So it'll be nearly impossible to save enough in that short period of time unless we have that ability to put a lot away. And then other resources, collegesavings.org. I mentioned all these, I think, pretty much. www.ed.gov, collegesavingsfoundation.org. That's the FAFSA website. collegecosts.ed.gov, and then www.finaid.org. Those are some of our other resources out there where we can find a lot of this and more detailed information on this stuff. And so in conclusion, guys, I know I went through a whole lot of information in a short period of time, right? But we want to decide if college is the right fit. Maybe consider alternative options, if necessary, or if that makes sense for our child. Do plenty of research. There's all the information's out there. So just go and do the research, compare schools, compare costs, things like that. Make sure you pick a good school and a good major with a high success rate. Right. As I mentioned, certain schools are specialized in certain majors. Right. So if our child knows that they want to study a certain thing, then we want to pick a school that has a reputation for that. Right. Where they have a much higher chance of getting a job right out of college. Apply for financial aid, utilize what they offer. Right. Don't ignore financial aid. Even if you think, hey, I make too much money to qualify or something like that, we still want to go through that process because you just never know what you might get. And then save and invest early and often. Costs continue to climb. You can't make up for lost time. So utilize the tax advantages of those college savings vehicles. And thank you for your time. So we'll go ahead and I'll pass it back over to Anthony.
Chris, awesome job. And thank you so much for providing that feedback. I know that was a lot of information for everyone, which is exactly why we took the liberty of making sure that we had our contact information up there. Now, Chris, is it safe to say that if people want to kind of continue the conversation and just sort of sit down with you over coffee, which I know many of you and I have done many a time pre-COVID, right? Is it safe to
Yeah.
say that they should shoot you an email or give you a phone call?
Yeah, I'd be glad to go through any of this in more detail with somebody, or answer any specific questions. As you mentioned before, right, your question might be very specific, to your personal situation, and that probably is better suited for a private conversation.
Mhm.
And I'd be glad to discuss that in detail.
Terrific, terrific. And obviously you're available and you're more than familiar with Zoom, right? As well as
Hmm.
Google Meet, right?
Very
So
much. Yep.
given the current climate, right?
Yep.
Or level of comfortability, then that's it's definitely an option. And myself as well. If you guys have individual questions or you want to simply continue the conversation regarding the college admissions process, maybe there is something specific to your child or your family with respect to understanding the college admissions process a little bit better, you're always more than welcome to contact me. And until then, I would definitely suggest for you to check out the YouTube channel as well as the Instagram portal, parent blog, etc. There's a lot of information there that a number of our parents have used in the past as a community. It's really our mission to kind of educate and empower the parents as well as the students. We want to make sure that you guys are as best informed in an ever evolving world of education. Now, on that note, and technically it is right around 8 o'clock, but Chris and I are going to stay on for a few extra minutes. If you guys have any individual questions that you would like answered, you are more than welcome to do your best in posting them in the chat, and then we'll take a few extra minutes of our time to kind of weigh in and provide any guidance where necessary. So if you have a specific question that you would like answered, and I'd be happy to even go back to the frequently asked questions for college admissions page. Feel free to post it in the chat and then we'll do our best. Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.